Hello, everyone. This is Tim. Welcome to my platform. Hopefully, you're watching this on Patreon. You could be watching it on YouTube. I'm not sure. I think that's the only two places where I put these videos. Um, I'm reading this month The Making of America. Okay. And I'm reading from this book because I think we need to know how we got to where we are today. And everything has collapsed, everything has fallen apart. For most of us, it fell apart years ago, but now it's falling apart for everyone else. When something collapses from the bottom, the people on the top floor don't always know right away. And in the middle of a building, they don't always know right away. So that's what's happening now. Now everybody knows. And the problem is this country was never put together well. And that's why I'm reading The Making of America. So here we go. Forced march to sunset. Migrating ever westward as the British and colonials clear their lands, America's native peoples unite in a desperate revolt, Pontiac's Rebellion. Does this story sound familiar? As troubled times beset a community, a self-styled prophet emerges predicting the end of the world and calling for repentance and a return to more traditional ways. And Neolin, a Native American mystic who foretold the end of the world in the 1760s, was right. His world and the world of all the Indian tribes that were being, or native tribes, that were being gradually overwhelmed by a steady influx of British colonists was doomed. In the 150 years since British settlers began landing on the east coast of North America, their relations with the native inhabitants had followed a predictable, deadly pattern. Initial friendship when the colonists were needy, growing distrust of the natives as the colonies became self-reliant, outright hatred and warfare as the colonies expanded and the two peoples battled for living room along the frontier. Meanwhile, natives perished by the tens of thousands from European diseases against which the tribes had no immunity. For almost 2 centuries, the Native Americans migrated westward, surrendering land from the Atlantic coast to the Alleghenies, then the western Appalachians, as at last finding themselves with their backs against the Mississippi River. The pace of retreat slowed somewhat by the mid-1700s as British westward expansion was blocked by the French territory of Louisiana, and the French seemed content to trade with the native tribes of the Ohio Valley rather than conquer them. But in 1763, when the British came into possession of all France's holdings in North America at the conclusion of the French and Native and Indian War, this temporary truce came to an end. From the start, British policy seemed calculated to offend the natives, or the tribes. The British abandoned the practice of making annual gifts to the chiefs, but natives had come to depend on the guns and powder, steel axes, and fishing nets, along with luxuries like tobacco and liquor. That was the problem. That had been supplied by the French during their decades of coexistence. With their dignity wounded, their livelihoods imperiled, and their lands under renewed threat by British expansion, now burgeoning at a pace never envisioned by the French, the tribes of the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes are convened, and the Great Lakes area convened a council of war on the banks of the Ecorse River near Detroit in April of 1763. Ringing in the ears of the assembled chiefs, were the words of Neolin, now remembered as the Delaware prophet who quoted a command given him by the Master of Life in a vision. Before the white men came on your lands, did you not live by bow and arrow? You had no need of gun nor powder. As regards those who have come to trouble your country, drive them out, make war on them. I love them not. They know me not. They are my enemies. One among the chiefs stood up Pontiac, chief of the Ottawa tribe and a disciple of Neolin's, roared that it is important for us, my brothers, that we exterminate from our lands this nation which seeks only to destroy us. A coalition of 6 nations quickly agreed to follow Pontiac into combat. After 3 months of preparation, the warriors of these tribes, eventually numbering more than a dozen nations, marched on 13 British forts in the Ohio Valley and the western Great Lakes region. Within weeks, 11 of the forts were in Pontiac's hands, but his biggest victory was scored in London, where the British government, its treasury exhausted, issued the Proclamation of 1763, which forbade further settlement east of the Appalachians. On the battlefield, however, the 2 forts that mattered most, Fort Pitt in western Pennsylvania and Fort Detroit in modern-day Michigan, held out against prolonged sieges. When the British sent large expeditions to relieve the forts the following spring, Pontiac's warriors stalked the soldiers and fought them bravely, but vainly. Courage was no match for superior British muskets. By the closing months of 1764, Pontiac's ammunition was running short. The British cannily negotiated separate peace treaties with several of the Confederate tribes and introduced a hideous new tactic, presenting blankets carrying smallpox to the natives. Both tactics proved effective. In 1765, Pontiac agreed to an honorable peace in which the nations he led surrendered no territory. For their part, the British decided it was less expensive to trade with the natives and supply them with gifts than it was to fight them. As for the English promise to leave the lands west of the Appalachian Range to the natives, it was kept, but not intentionally. By the time white settlers were ready to press westward once again, the British were gone and the U.S. was an independent nation. Sadly, the change in flag brought no change in fortunes for Pontiac and his people. The killing, the deceit, the migrations resumed in earnest, just as Neolin had foretold. And you can see some pictures. It was kind of hard to read because you see there's clouds and things. The text is kind of light, but I'm telling you, these books are really good. Really nice little timeline books. And again, as you see, once the United States was made, it was war and I guess outright death or war. I guess all spoils go to the victor. So I guess it's just to say it was war. Until next time, we'll continue reading this month. There's a lot in here. And we'll get to some of the characters, some of the figures, the Washingtons, the Franklins. Don't worry about it. We'll get to those people. Until next time, I want to thank you for your support. And remember to please take care of your minds, take care of your bodies, and be safe.